Welcome back to the Primal Reset podcast. We're joined today by Dr. Susan Hewlings. She's the co-founder at Substantiation Sciences and the VP at Radical Science, and a leading expert in nutrition and clinical research. She's been the forefront of validating natural health products through the real-world clinical trials and helping bridge the gap between ancient wellness and modern science. Susan, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the show.
No, thanks, Elliot. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So share a little bit about your story and what got you into the wellness industry.
Okay, yeah. In some ways, I feel like I always have been, and it's been kind of a long road. My father was a physical therapist, and he had his own practice when I was growing up. So I was always around, the idea of, and he was an athletic trainer. So the idea of fitness, the importance of sports. My dad played baseball in college, et cetera. So like, it was just always around me. And then I myself played sports in high school. I was a cheerleader and I played lacrosse and a runner. And so it just sort of evolved naturally. It was what I was always interested in. And I met my dad's colleague who was an exercise physiologist. I think I was maybe 15. So that's kind of where I really got it, like thinking about it from the terms of a career. So that's kind of where it started. And then it evolved from there. And it's continued to evolve over the years. And it's something that I just never have lost my passion or interest for. And so that's kind of where it started. And then I think I had some unhealthy eating practices in high school, which kind of led me more to nutrition than exercise. I originally went to Florida State to get a master's degree in exercise physiology and ended up with getting the master's, but I got my bachelor's in nutrition, and it all is so interconnected. And I was so lucky to go to a university where nutrition and exercise phys were in the same department. And so you really could integrate them. So right from the start, the reason I'm telling that is right from the start, I realized how important it was to connect aspects of health and not to silo any one aspect.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. I think if we really went into the discussion, it could be, a giant rabbit hole going down everything in the wellness industry that kind of correlates within each other. Would you say we always hear, it's what you eat, it's the time you spend in the kitchen to actually build muscle, lose weight, burn fat, whatever it may be that the person's goal is. It's more the time in the kitchen spent than it is the time in the gym. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I think it's such a delicate combination, and I hate to say time in the kitchen because I'm going to be honest right here. Is I do not spend time in the kitchen. In case anyone that knows me is listening, they will call me out on it if we say it that way. But I think that yeah, if you do one without the other, you got to have both, and you got to have the right combination. So when you think about it, I think the way that I like to say it is that being fit, being healthy, it's 24/7 because it's about how much sleep you do, you get how much exercise you do, sure, but then it's everything else, and it's your mental health and your balance. And I think that the time you actually spend working out or in the gym is actually the least of it, even though that gets the most focus from most people. So yeah, I don't want to make like downplay that at all, because that hour or two that you spend there, that counts. But when you think about it on a 24-hour perspective, it's the least amount.
Okay, interesting. And yeah, I definitely agree with, it's definitely both. And, sleep comes into it as well. It's not just the nutrition you're putting in your body or the fitness that you're doing every single day. I could definitely agree with that. With everything growing on social media and all the fitness accounts and everyone sharing their advice, there's definitely a growing demand for science-backed validation. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's specifically because there's so much information, or what's your take on that?
That definitely plays into it. I think people like when information first started becoming readily available, because I have to admit I'm old enough to have seen this come from where we had to rely on books and experts to it being readily available. I think once we've gotten over just sort of like the overwhelming amount of information, is that's exactly what it is. People have become overwhelmed with information, and a lot of it's conflicting. And so I think that finally people are saying, oh, wait, where is the truth, and how do we get to the truth? And what has become challenging as experts to communicate to the public is that very little of this is 1 + 1 = 2. Very little of it is just like this fits everybody. And as humans, it's natural in our mind. We want lists. We want, we want black and white. Is this good for me or bad for me? And as soon as you're like, well, it depends, people are like, no, 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 no. And that's why these books and websites where it's like, eat this, never eat this is bad, this is good, those sell. But then people start realizing, but wait, I can't do that long term, or that doesn't make sense to never ever eat, I don't know, whatever, carrots, because carrots got a bad name or whatever it is. So I think that that's where it's coming from. It's coming from that place of like, well, yeah, but what does the science say? And so science backed. And so there's all these products that do this, do that, or whatever. Which ones work? Which ones will work for me? And, of course, which ones are safe. And so I think that, yeah, I think that's where the science, I mean, there's always been a need for science backed information and for people to feel like things work. But I think that need has been, extremely increased because of the overwhelming amount of information.
But I would have to agree with that as well. There's definitely, I would say the main point for me is the overload of information, but also at the same time the realization of, this might work for someone. And you hear, carnivore diet, for example, has been one of the
Yeah.
biggest ones that we've heard recently, and everyone should go on it and et cetera. And it does work for some people, but that's the fine print that not everyone listens to or reads, and kind of realizing your body is different than everyone else's, so it might work well for you and it might not. And kind of having the science backed by some companies and some people like yourself to be able to realize what is actually good for me, and actually speak with someone who understands nutrition, can understand your body, to make sure that you're providing the most optimal nutrition for your body and whatever goal you might have with that as well. So, where would you see the biggest gaps between wellness brands and their promises and what's actually proven to work?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think there's not like one answer. There's certainly a lot of brands, both from like B2B, like ingredients and branded ingredients and finished products that do have research. I mean, I think there's this message in the mass media like nobody has research. The dietary supplement industry is not regulated. None of those things are true. Dietary supplement industry is regulated, just not regulated like drugs are and stuff. That's just to be clear. And that there are brands that have science. So those do exist. But I think that there are also a lot that do not. And so, that's probably the biggest gap is that brands that present themselves as having science about their products when they don't. And to me, that creates a huge gap because then everything else falls into that gap. So transparency then might be the answer. Like if we have to give that one word answer, a lack of transparency might be the answer to that. Because I think it's like, a lot of people say, well, they're using existing science. Well, in some cases, that's okay. But in other cases, when you have like a multi-ingredient formula, you might want to use existing science and also have a study on the finished product. And when is that okay, et cetera. And so transparency helps the consumer understand exactly what is known about what's in their product. So if, we know that there are studies that show that magnesium supports sleep and there's magnesium in that product, I want to know that it's the magnesium that's driving the sleep benefits associated with this product. So it comes down to transparency. And I think that's really what more brands need to embrace. And the brands that do, we need to celebrate them. And that's where we need to, support the transparency.
Absolutely. The awareness of it is hopefully starting to increase a bit more. But like you said, the transparency between which ingredients and does what in that certain product. We see so many blended herbal products nowadays and more natural, and they're all science backed, and there's definitely science between all of them, but it's, use this for this reason, but we're not going to tell you what's actually helping that specific reason. Like, oh, take vitamin B12 and take vitamin D3 and take vitamin C and take, but what does it do for us, and it's that curiosity that we finally have. Instead of just taking it, we're now questioning. There's so many supplements on the market nowadays, and there's so much science behind all of it, but we do want to know the white and black. Is this good for us? Is this not? But at the same time, we want to know, what is it actually good for, this particular ingredient? Because if you're adding all of those, like I have a supplement that I take that has vitamin D3 and vitamin, I think, B12 in it as well. And, I'm not sure exactly what both of them do. and being combined as well, and having that finished product, if you will, having that science behind the finished product. Like, I'm not sure with them together what they do. Do they cancel each other out? Do they both provide separate benefits? So I could definitely agree with you on the transparency of things. And we've seen some brands adopt to that, but definitely to see that more in the future would definitely be a good thing.
Absolutely. And you know that we have the means by which to communicate that. I mean, sure, you can't put all that on the label, but you certainly can on your social media, on your website, et cetera. And you can provide links to the science you're using to support your claims. And there's no reason not to do that. And a lot of studies are open access, whereby anybody, used to be that you had to have a university account to access almost any peer-reviewed journal. And now a lot of the journals have gone to open access. So there's no reason not to provide the links. And if it's not open access, at least the reference. So if you're looking at a product and they don't do that, and they're like science back, but then they don't show you the science, that again, that's not transparent, and that should be something you should question. So that's kind of what I mean for that. So yeah, that's a great point. And I think, you said clinically proven. And, I think the word proven is one of those words that gets a little, it's because in science, nothing's proven, right? As we keep generating, science is supposed to generate more questions than answers. And we're, as scientists, that word can be like, but I think what it means in this context is really clinically studied or clinically shown, clinically demonstrated. In other words, do you have research where you studied a large amount of people, or enough people anyway, to get at what you were really trying to find out? And was it well controlled? Did it apply the proper research methods of the scientific method? Did we have a placebo group? Was it blinded? All these things. And did we find a difference between the placebo group and the active group? I mean, I'm giving a real basic example, but you get what I mean.
Right.
That's a clinically studied, clinically validated claim or product. And that's really something that we should be looking for in our product.
I agree, and actually, I appreciate you catching me on saying proven, because definitely in science, what we're almost not taught, I would say, but almost something we just don't realize and we just assume is when there's a study scientifically backed, we assume it's a proven fact, and science proved it. And like you said, science just comes up with more questions. That's everything in science is a hypothesis and a thesis on what we've seen based on the studies that we have done. What I wanted to ask you next is more on the business side of things. I know that you are the co-founder of Substantiation Sciences. You are also the VP of Radical Sciences. Share with me challenges and we can go more on the substantiation side since it's your own business, and share with me some challenges that you faced when starting it, and how you were able to overcome those challenges.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so most of my career, to be clear, most of my career has been spent in academia. So that's where I started when I got my PhD, and I spent 20 plus years a full-time professor. So I made a transition out of academia into industry sort of gradually, like I did some consulting and stuff. Always had to have two jobs to pay the bills. That's the part people don't realize about academia. So I just gradually transitioned more and more into business, and I started doing the consulting very gradually. So Substantiation Sciences kind of started there in the consulting. But again, my co-founder, Dr. Kalman, and I were both, it was just sort of our consulting that we did on the side. We were both maintaining other jobs, etc. And so I started working for a major CRO in the industry full time, so I couldn't do much on the consulting side and for my own business, etc. So I think the challenge is always trying to find the balance. And a big challenge is, when do you make the leap to work for yourself? I think that's true no matter what what field you're in, because it's a scary leap to make, and it's a big commitment, right? And so that has always been the biggest challenge for my partner and I. And he had the opportunity to make the leap to go full time for our business, which was wonderful. So I'm not full time for Substantiation Sciences, and I am full time for Radical Sciences. And it seems like, well, how can you have two jobs? Well, the two things, they don't conflict each other. At Radical Science, what we do at Radical Science, and I'm Senior Vice President of Scientific Affairs there. And what we do there is we do virtual real world trials on dietary supplements. So what we're able to do is we're able to generate this evidence that we're talking about and this transparency, because we are doing some of the largest trials done on dietary supplements. So our studies are done with at least 250 people per arm. We have double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. These are not like just consumer marketing trials. These are RCTs. And we're able to access people across the US. So people in rural areas, people like you and I that are so busy we'd never have time to go to a CRO or go to a university lab, we can participate in a study. So real world. And also, we're in our daily lives. We are now participating in a study in a way that we would use or engage with this product once we were a consumer. So that real world trials. And so we do RCTs, and really we're changing the way that those are done at Radical. So it's amazing. And we are generating science that then can be used to substantiate your marketing claims. Substantiation Sciences is more regulatory and scientific consulting in the dietary supplement space. So we do a lot of consulting for brands to help them increase their transparency. How do we do that? Do we need more research? Do we need certain regulatory documents? Do we need approval? Can you look at the existing science for us and tell us what claims we can make, as we're starting out, because we may need to wait a while to generate revenue to do the studies. Because that's a big part, like, that doesn't get talked about enough either. Everybody says everybody should do a study. Everybody needs to have research. Well, yeah, but it costs money and it's not cheap, right? And for a lot of startup brands, that can be very hard to do out of the gate. It can be very cost prohibitive, especially for a traditional CRO study. It can be very expensive. And so that was another thing Radical wanted to try to address, was to try to keep the pricing as reasonable as possible. But nonetheless, even if it's reasonable, a lot of startups don't have that budget yet. They have to sell product to get the budget. So the existing science can make sure that they remain transparent even right out of the gate. And we can help them notify the FDA of their marketing claims 30 days prior to market release. And then also make sure that they have things like GRAS approvals or substantiation dossiers, those sort of things. So again, those are kind of the two roles that I play, but they're very much contribute to each other and complement each other.
I love it. I love it. And it's a great story. And you hear so many entrepreneurs who are trying to start something and wondering if they should take the full leap or if they should start on part-time. And I'm a big believer in having a secure job that you can afford the bills and start something on essentially your 9 to 5 and your 5 to 9. So you can start something on the side, build that to where you can eventually take a bit more time into it, and then eventually be able to go full time into things like that. And that's a huge challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people in the wellness space as well. Um, the way that you guys are doing it, and you're getting the best of both worlds, having a business partner, being able to be full time while you can focus on your full job and help them out on the side is something that is perfect. That partnership ends up working out. And it sounds like what you guys are doing is very innovative and very great for the community. Us talking about the transparency between all of the supplements and all the nutritional facts within supplements is something that we need to see more of. So I love that you guys are doing that. I guess my next question would be, what's the first step that, and we can answer this in either the business way or the personal way, but what's the first step someone should take, whether marketing their nutritional supplements in transparency wise, or what's the first step in buying a supplement and looking at all of the ingredients, and where can we find this transparency?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And it is kind of like separate, like from the consumer perspective or the business perspective. If you have a good idea for formulation, this is going to be spoken like a true educator. So I have to just excuse myself from it. But I'm going to say science in both circumstances. Where do you start in both circumstances? The science. Because if you are going to develop a supplement, let's just say, like, you want to go to the science first, right? Like, you think, okay, well, how do you formulate? Well, the first step is the science. And you go and you say, okay, well, the science, what does that mean? Well, it can mean a lot of different things. First of all, marketing data is part of the science, right? Like, what are consumers doing? Where is there an unmet need? What's the data behind that? How are the consumer? We have so much of that right now with social media and tracking and AI that you can get a really good idea. Like, okay, so it seems like there's an unmet need in this population or for this ingredient or for this indication or whatever. And then you can go to the science and say, what's out there? What studies have been done? What existing science can be shown for individual ingredients that I can potentially put together? Or maybe you're going to do just an individual ingredient. I mean, it depends on. So you have to make those decisions up front. And then you go to the science to find all that out, of course. money. You got to have money and you got to have contacts. And I think that that's a good thing too, is developing and building your contacts, your relationships. I mean, we can talk about my two separate jobs, but at the end of the day, it's me, right? It's really not. It's one job because it's me and it's my reputation, it's my expertise, and it's myself out there. And so that one of the things that I have to pat myself on the back for that I've done over my career is maintain good relationships and friendships, so that the people that I interact with are people I met in graduate school. Dr. Kalman and I met when we were at Florida State. And so, which was quite a few years ago, we worked at the gym together. But anyway, that to me is important, like who you know. And then you can find a good contract manufacturer. You can find a good, someone to help you with your sales if you're going to do them on TikTok or Amazon, all that stuff, because you can't do all that yourself. So that's the second thing, understanding that is that you can't do everything yourself. So you have to build your team and the people you trust. So those are all really important aspects. And, I also admire passion, and that's how I found Radical. Like they had a really good idea, and the co-founders of Radical, Jeff Chen and Payleen Thorogood, they are passionate people. And so again, I've surrounded myself with passionate people that know what they're doing. And I've done that throughout my career. And that's probably to me just as important as the 11 years I spent in college. So there's that. And then from the consumer side, I think it's the same thing. You kind of have to do your homework. And I think part of that is gathering data. And part of that is, do you really need what you're taking? In some circumstances, like, do you need to take B12? Do you need to take vitamin D? And the only way to know that, of course, would be to get some really good biomarkers or biodata. So again, back to the science, back to the data. So I think it's just like understanding what you need and then understanding what will get you what you need from that perspective. That's part of it. And sometimes it's hard. I make it sound easy that to get biomarkers, sometimes it can be hard, but a good functional medicine specialist can help you get the right blood work. Because sometimes the standard blood work doesn't tell you, like, do you need magnesium and do you need some of those basic things? But again, it does come to gathering data, doing your homework, looking at the science as best you can. And if you don't know, ask an expert and someone who does. And that is not an influencer on TikTok, usually. Sometimes it is if it's you have a professional person that's being influenced, just a general person on there. Be very careful where you get your information. And that may be the hardest part from the consumer side. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. And, I've actually spoken with a lot of founders within the biohacking space and people who can give that information. So if anyone's curious, go look at my past podcasts, and there's some information down there for you as well. Susan, I appreciate your time. I'm sure we could go a lot further into questions and have a much longer podcast for the next one. But share with me a little bit, where can we find more information about you, your services, any social media links that you want to share with us as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Radical Science, it's Radicle. Radical Science has a great website and LinkedIn page. And if anybody wants to participate in a study, that's another way you can get involved and be like a citizen scientist. So that's kind of cool. And you can go to our website to do that. And then substantiationsciences.com. We have a website and we are on LinkedIn. And then my personal LinkedIn page too. If you want to connect with me directly, that's probably the best place to find me. And I'd love to hear from you. And Elliot, thanks so much for this. I really love having the conversation. And yeah, I feel like I could talk to you for a long time. So
Absolutely. And we'll definitely have to do this again. I'll have all of your information down below. So if anyone is looking to be part of a study, hit up Radical Science. And if anyone wants to connect with Susan, her LinkedIn will be down below as well. She is a teacher, she is an educator, so she shares a lot of great information that I'm sure, we try to learn every single day. Follow her, send her a message, connect with her, and then hopefully Susan will be able to do this podcast, and maybe hopefully for an hour the next time.
that would be so great. Thanks so much.